The most dangerous part of my night shift wasn't the strangers who came in after midnight, but the list of rules taped behind the counter. Rules that didn't explain why, only what would happen if I failed. At 12:07 a.m., I stood alone in a fast food restaurant that suddenly felt too quiet, holding greasy keys I didn't remember agreeing to take, while my coworker backed towards the door like he was escaping a burning building. He didn't wish me luck. He didn't say goodbye. He leaned in close and whispered, "Whatever you do, don't break the rules." I laughed. Of course I did, because nothing terrible ever starts with a laugh, right? But then the drive-through bell rang with no car outside. The lights flickered like something had just blinked, and when I finally read the rules about customers you must never serve, children you must never help, and the exact minute you must leave or else, I understood something far too late. This wasn't a job. It was a test, and something in that building was waiting to see if I would fail. Have you ever noticed how food tastes different after midnight? Like it absorbs the silence and gives it back to you in grease and regret. That was the thought running through my head as the drive-through speaker crackled to life and a voice ordered enough food to feed a small village. The list kept going, stacking item on item, each one heavier than the last, until I glanced at my coworker and whispered whether the guy ordering planned to share or hibernate. My coworker barely laughed. He just shook his head and told me I'd get used to seeing him, that some people didn't come here for food so much as routine, like this place was the last thing that still recognized them. When the customer finally lumbered forward, the floor almost seemed to dip under his weight. He paid with damp, crumpled bills that smelled faintly of old oil and something sour, grunting with satisfaction like the transaction alone had fed him. I watched him waddle away, heart pounding faster than it should have, telling myself I was just tired, because fear loves disguising itself as exhaustion. We worked in silence after that, fries spilling into cartons, burgers sizzling like they were gossiping about us. And that's when my coworker's phone went off. Loud, jarring, wrong. His smile drained from his face so fast it scared me more than anything else that night. He listened, nodded, whispered, "Okay." And when he hung up, he looked like someone who had just been told the world was ending but had to finish their shift anyway. His parents had been in a wreck. His mother was in critical condition. The words felt unreal, floating between us like smoke. I told him to go, insisted he didn't owe this place anything, and for a second he just stared at me like he was trying to decide whether leaving me alone was worse than staying. Then he reached into his pocket and placed a key in my palm, cold and heavier than it had any right to be. He told me there were rules, night rules, that they weren't jokes, that I needed to follow them exactly, even if they sounded insane. I laughed, because of course I did, because that's what people do right before they learn better. He ran out the door, it slammed shut behind him, and the restaurant felt different immediately, like it had been waiting for me to be alone. I put on his headset, adjusted my hat, and headed toward the office to see what kind of rules a burger joint needed to survive the night. The door was absurdly heavy, like it didn't want to open, and when I finally stepped inside, my eyes landed on a smiling portrait of the manager, beaming down like he owned more than just the building. I muttered something under my breath and turned to the bulletin board, where the paper hung crooked, yellowed, and undeniably real. As I read the list, my laughter faded line by line. 7-minute grace period, hooded figures at the drive-thru, specific customers with specific instructions, a warning about something leaking from under the grill that definitely wasn't blood, an old woman who would arrive at the exact same minute every night, a child you should never help, a feeling of being watched that demanded isolation, a precise time I had to leave because something else didn't like company. I stood there staring, heart thudding, trying to convince myself this was a prank, some twisted initiation for the new kid. That's when I heard a chair scrape behind me. I turned, and there he was again, already too close, already smiling like he knew something I didn't. He said I forgot his pickles. And just like that, the rules stopped being funny.
Have you ever felt that sharp drop in your stomach when a joke suddenly stops being funny? like your body realizes the danger before your brain is ready to admit it. That's exactly how it felt when he leaned in closer, breath heavy with grease and something old, asking about pickles like it was a personal insult carved into his soul. I almost laughed it off, almost argued, almost treated him like any other customer who wanted to feel powerful over a teenager behind a counter. But then the words from the paper flashed in my head with terrifying clarity. If he complains, offer the shake. If he refuses, run. My mouth moved on its own, apologizing, offering him a free chocolate shake, my voice shaking just enough to betray me. His face changed instantly. Not angry, not pleased, amused. He shook his head slowly, folds of skin rippling, and said there were other ways I could make it up to him. My chest tightened so hard it hurt, panic exploding through me as I stammered, my voice cracking, telling him my age, misunderstanding him on purpose because my brain refused to process anything else. He laughed, a wet, ugly sound, and called me stupid before demanding a refund for food he had already devoured. When I said no, his smile vanished. He stepped behind the counter, massive and fast in a way his size shouldn't allow, and suddenly survival took over. I ran. My shoes slipped on the tile, shelves crashed as he barreled after me, screaming promises of what he'd do once he caught me. The office door felt heavier than before, like it wanted proof I deserved to be inside. I shoved it with everything I had, barely squeezing through before slamming it shut as his fists collided with the metal, denting it, rattling it, making my teeth chatter. I slid to the floor, shaking, tears streaking down my face as his voice bellowed threats inches away. He was right. I couldn't stay in there forever. My hands fumbled for my phone, dialing the manager's number with trembling fingers, every ring stretching like torture. When he finally answered, annoyed and half asleep, I could barely get the words out. He didn't sound surprised. He told me to put the phone on speaker, to hold it to the door. And when he spoke the man's name, the pounding stopped instantly. The silence was worse. The customer's voice changed, shrinking, pleading, begging him not to call his mother. I almost laughed through my tears at how ridiculous it sounded, but the fear stayed lodged in my chest. The manager made him apologize, ordered him to leave, and just like that, it was over. I waited until the front door slammed shut before breathing again, my body sagging with relief so intense it felt like weeping from the inside. The manager joked about overgrown man babies, wished me luck, and hung up. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the door, wondering what kind of place solved problems by threatening customers with their parents. Eventually, I forced myself up, stepping back into the kitchen to clean the mess left behind. I told myself the worst had already happened, that nothing else could possibly top that. And that was the moment I noticed the figure standing at the drive-through window, perfectly still, yellow eyes glowing in the dark, tapping softly on the glass, like it had all the time in the world.
The knock was gentle at first, almost polite, like whoever stood outside understood manners even if it didn't understand humanity, and that somehow made my skin crawl more than if it had started pounding right away. I froze, mop slipping from my fingers, heart hammering so violently I thought it might betray me with sound. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just stared through the glass with eyes that glowed an ugly yellow, sharp and hungry, like a predator patiently waiting for its prey to make a mistake. Then the rule screamed through my mind, louder than fear, louder than instinct, and I dropped behind the counter, curling in on myself like a child hiding from thunder. The knocking grew louder, faster, fists slamming against the window with enough force to make the glass shudder in its frame, and I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering to myself that it couldn't come in, that it wouldn't come in, that rules existed for a reason. The sound built and built, a relentless assault that rattled my bones and turned my thoughts into static.
And just when I felt like I might break, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I waited, breath shallow, tears leaking down my cheeks as my body shook uncontrollably, counting seconds that felt like hours. When I finally dared to look, the window was empty, untouched, as if nothing had ever been there at all. I laughed then, a thin, hysterical sound, wiping my face and checking the time, telling myself I could handle this. Just a couple more hours and I'd be free. I tried to lose myself in cleaning, sweeping the floors the way my coworker had asked earlier, grateful for something normal to focus on. That relief didn't last. The door chimed, and two college kids stumbled in, reeking of smoke and laughter, grabbing their order and leaving behind echoes of normalcy that vanished the second the next customer stepped inside. She was small, draped head to toe in black, her shawl blending into the shadows like it belonged there. She didn't thank the boys for holding the door. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the counter with purpose, and something about the way she moved made my stomach twist. I was exhausted, running on fumes and caffeine, and the rules slipped my mind just long enough for me to meet her gaze. Her eyes were wrong, yellow and reptilian, boring into me with a weight that pressed down on my thoughts, slowing them, softening them, making sleep feel dangerously close. I tried to speak, yawned instead, my body betraying me as her stare pulled me under like deep water. The room faded, edges blurring, my mind drifting until one last instruction surfaced just in time. I murmured the question, barely louder than a breath. "Where's Tony?" The spell snapped instantly. I blinked, heart racing, and the woman was gone. No sound, no trace, nothing but the lingering chill of her presence. I stood there shaking, splashing cold water on my face, pouring coffee like it was a lifeline, telling myself staying awake was the only thing keeping me alive. I dumped the dustpan into the trash, hands still trembling, and that's when the feeling crawled over me, slow and deliberate, like invisible fingers tracing my spine. I was being watched. I turned toward the drive-thru. Nothing. Toward the dining area. Empty. Panic surged, dizziness hitting me hard as a soft whisper brushed past my ear, speaking my name like it knew me. I didn't think. I ran. I locked myself in the office, pacing, weeping quietly, waiting for the sensation to fade, praying this wasn't what every night would be like. When it finally lifted, I sagged into a chair, hollow and afraid, only to be jolted back to reality by static crackling through the headset, a slurred voice asking if we were open, and I realized the night wasn't done with me yet. The man on the speaker sounded barely conscious, words slurring together like he was drowning in them, and I answered on autopilot, exhaustion making my voice flat, even as my nerves stayed razor sharp. I prepared his order with shaking hands, muttering to myself about who even craves fish sandwiches in the dead of night, trying to ground my fear in sarcasm because it was easier than admitting how close I felt to falling apart. I served him quickly, eager to be done, to push another normal interaction into the pile of proof that this night wasn't completely cursed. He lingered just long enough to point toward the counter and ask if there was a kid standing there. My stomach dropped. I turned slowly, and there he was, small, too small to be alone, messy blonde hair hanging into wide blue eyes that looked scared enough to make my chest ache. I sighed, already exhausted by the responsibility, thinking this was just one more problem to solve before closing, until the rule detonated in my head like a siren. Ignore him. He does not have good intentions. I froze mid-step, heart screaming at me to help, while my brain begged me not to move. I turned away, pretending to clean, pretending I didn't hear him when he started crying. The sound cut deep, high-pitched sobs echoing off the walls, pulling at every part of me that wanted to be kind. He ran into the kitchen, filthy clothes clinging to his tiny frame, grabbing at my shirt, begging me to help him find his mother. Tears streamed down his cheeks, and for a moment I almost broke, almost knelt down, almost doomed myself, because no rule should ever ask you to abandon a child. Something inside me snapped instead. I yelled. I told him to get out, to leave me alone, my voice raw and cracked, tears spilling freely as fear and frustration collided. The change was instant. He stopped crying, stood up straight. His eyes darkened, red bleeding into blue like a bruise spreading under skin, and a slow, satisfied grin crept across his face. He told me I'd made the right choice, his voice low and wrong, and then he walked calmly out the door, leaving me shaking and hollow. I stood there for a long time afterwards, laughing weakly through tears, telling myself I didn't care, that I was done feeling anything. I finished cleaning, counting minutes, praying for the clock to hit 2 so I could escape this place forever. That's when I saw it, the dark red liquid seeping from beneath the stove, thick and slow, pooling on the floor like it had been waiting for me. I groaned, grabbed the mop, and started cleaning, gagging every time I breathed as a metallic taste filled my mouth. The stuff kept coming, bucket after bucket, my hands blistering, my arms burning, weeping openly as I begged it to stop. When it finally did, relief hit me so hard I laughed and cheered, feeling victorious for the first time all night. Then I checked the time. 2:35. Panic exploded in my chest as I sprinted for the freezer, tearing open bags of frozen patties and dumping them onto the grill like offerings, praying I wasn't already too late. I turned around to throw the empty packaging away, and that's when I saw him standing there, smiling like he'd been waiting just for me.
He stood there, casually, like he belonged, like the kitchen was his and I was the one trespassing. And the moment our eyes met, I understood why the rule had given an exact minute instead of a warning. His eyes were empty in a way that made my chest ache, black and bottomless, framed by a small mask that looked stitched together by something that didn't care about comfort or kindness. Wisps of red hair poked out from beneath a floppy hat, and his uniform was a mockery of familiarity, striped and tattered, a stained red tie dotted with tiny burgers swaying as he breathed. He smiled, and that smile showed teeth that had never known a toothbrush or mercy, jagged and rotten, and my legs refused to move as his voice filled the room, rough and gravelly, telling me he'd let it slide this time because I was new. Imagine being grateful to something like that. He warned me that next time he wouldn't hesitate to increase his calorie intake, licking his cracked lips slowly, deliberately, like he wanted me to imagine exactly how that would feel. My heart slammed so hard I thought it might burst, fear freezing me in place as he tilted his head and asked why I was still there. When he told me to get out, the spell broke. I ran. I tore through the dining area, burst into the cool night air, lungs burning as the parking lot stretched out, empty and unforgiving. I locked the door behind me with shaking hands, his soulless stare drilling into my back until I reached my car and collapsed inside, sobbing, laughing, shaking all at once as adrenaline drained away. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and rage, anger slowly replacing fear as I replayed the night over and over, every rule, every threat, every impossible thing. I didn't sleep. I drank coffee until my hands trembled and drove back before the sun was fully up, determination burning hotter than exhaustion. I stormed into the office, demanding answers, shouting over the manager's phone call until he finally snapped and looked at me like I was the problem. I told him everything, every horrifying detail, my voice cracking, tears threatening to spill again as I quit on the spot, slamming my hat on his desk like punctuation. He didn't argue. He smiled. Then he named the pay. My anger faltered. My future flashed before me,
College bills, freedom, relief, and I hated myself for hesitating. I countered. He accepted. His handshake was clammy and wrong, but I shook it anyway, because sometimes survival doesn't look like bravery. It looks like compromise. As I walked out, his final words followed me like a promise and a threat all at once. Welcome to the night crew. And even now, long after that first shift, I still wake up some nights at exactly 2:37 a.m., heart racing, convinced I can smell grease and hear soft laughter in the dark, wondering if I really chose the job, or if the job chose me.